Welcome to Praise Hands, home of the Praise Hands, where we are all about creative, cross-cultural Christianity. I'm your host, Robbie Valderrama. As we approach Election Day here in 2020, millions upon millions of voters find themselves having to choose between options that they may not be all that proud of. But what if the biggest difference we can make in the world isn't checking the right box? What if we can vote not every couple years, but every day through our time, money, and lifestyle? What if our families, our businesses, and our local churches are actually the primary mechanisms through which God has called us to make an impact, choosing local leadership over national noise? As you listen to this episode today with former IRS agent Sherry Peel Jackson, I hope you are encouraged to build creative cross-cultural solutions right where you're at. Let's head on in. All right, good morning, Sherry. How are you?
I'm great, Robbie. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm in the Nashville area. You are in the Atlanta area, so we're about 4 hours away, and I'm happy to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So just so our listeners can learn a little bit about you before we dive in, you are a retired CPA, which is, for accounting and taxes. You're a certified fraud examiner, as well as a former IRS agent who specialized in auditing pastors. You're also a licensed minister who specializes in church financial health and integrity. We're excited to learn from you. There's a lot that has been going on over really the whole 2020, what we've been used to in terms of our homes, in terms of our workplaces, in terms of our church life has been completely disrupted. So just to start off, how has this experience been for you over this last year?
It's been a lot of adjustment. This time has never happened before. This is unprecedented. So a lot of adjustment. And I encourage people to make sure that they don't get frustrated because we have more adjustments to come. One of the things that we have to do is figure out what is going to make ourselves and our family continue to go forward. As far as the churches are concerned, getting online, making sure that they can go forward, making sure that they can still meet the needs of the congregation, making sure that they can still go out and minister somehow, even if it's online, even if it's some rallies that are there with the mask or whatever they need to do. So just moving forward and not staying still, not getting frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And how's this personally been for you?
It's been interesting, Robbie. I'm a traveler. I'm a world traveler. I love to travel. I've missed 3 trips and they just canceled my 4th because Costa Rica is not open to the United States. So it's really rough for me. So I'm trying to bear with it and continue to help people here in the States and continue to find ways to help the body of Christ move forward in this pandemic.
Yeah, no, I understand that. We've had some trips canceled as well. And you just kind of roll with it and figure out what you're going to do instead. And there's always new opportunities that pop up in times of big change. And we got to see the silver lining. So speaking of rolling with the punches, during this time, you've talked with a bunch of churches and many of our listeners are very involved in their church life. What is your advice to churches, especially those whose economics have been severely disrupted in this time?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I do have church clients that are trying to figure out where to go. The main thing is to keep forward. Some of them have mortgages, some of them have rent. Just encouraging the congregation that although they're not meeting physically, prayerfully they're online some way, whether it's Facebook Live or Zoom or however they are meeting, to go ahead and continue to give their tithes, give their offerings, because those bills aren't going anywhere. Now, granted, I understand that bills like the light bill and things that are going to fluctuate are going down if you're not in the building. They'll exist, but they'll be only a fraction of what they used to be. However, those steady things like the mortgage have to be paid. So first of all, just making the congregation understand that, because some people may be in the mindset of, well, I'm not there, so I don't have to give. And that's the first thing. Keep the church going. Second thing is making sure that they keep in touch with the membership, putting systems in place so that there is a way to keep up with the members, whether the church be a large church or small church. They can do what Jethro told Moses to do, which is go and divide up the church by ministers and have a certain amount of people under a certain minister so that everybody will stay in contact, all the needs will be met, and nobody will fall through the cracks. So those are the 2 major things. Keep in touch with your membership and make sure that they understand that the church is still the church. A church is not a building, although we have to pay for the building.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know, I think it was J.D. Greer's church. They basically split off into a bunch of cell groups and said, all right, this is our new form of church. What are your thoughts on that approach?
I've been familiar with that for a long time, since the 80s. And I think that works. It keeps people involved. It keeps that iron sharpening iron. I've heard people, unfortunately, say they go to a large church so that nobody will be in their business. They'll go in, they'll listen to a sermon, and they'll leave. And that's not what church is. And we have those at the church that I attend. We have them. And now we're doing Zoom. So that's great. So each group has a Zoom, and they do it on Zoom. So I believe that will work. And that's how the early church was started anyway. So we're going back to what we used to be. So I'm in total agreement with it. And I know that it's working all across the country.
Right. And so since we're on the topic of church and finances, in the early church, the tithes were distributed according to the local unit as opposed to like a broader body. And the apostles, of course, came in sometimes and said, hey, we need some money over here. Let's all pull the money together. Are you seeing any churches that rather than having the tithes being collected at the larger locations are collecting it in the cell group format?
I've heard of that. I've heard of it. And it's kind of a difficult thing because those cell groups usually are all across the city. As a matter of fact, one of my largest clients was doing that earlier on. It wasn't during this time, but they tried to collect. And it was hard because with the people spread out all over town, they had a hard time sometimes getting those collections in. So, for example, if John Doe wrote a check on January 12th and that cell group member didn't get over to the church for a couple of weeks, that becomes an issue. Why hasn't my check cashed? So that's been an issue. So what I've seen churches do is establish post office boxes. A lot of people are concerned with all those tithes and offerings coming in the regular mailbox because, unfortunately, in this day and age, we have people that go in mailboxes. So they've established P.O. boxes, and one or two people are in charge of getting the money from the P.O. box and, at certain times a week going ahead and doing the accounting for that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So looking at the relationship between church and between government, and in this time, there's been a lot of discussion, whether it is things like John MacArthur's church choosing to reopen and, saying that it's not the government's job to tell the church what to do, or it could be protesters, even as far as Christian anarchists saying, hey, we actually want to destroy property to make a better system of governance and all these sort of things. What is your view on this relationship between church and government? And what do you see as being a good path forward for our country?
Under the law, actually, the church is not tax exempt. It's tax immune, which means that it doesn't have anything to do with the system. That separation of church and state, although it was just a letter, and it's not something that is literally in government, it's been something that's embedded and set a precedent. So the government doesn't have any authority over the church unless the church puts itself under the authority of the government. And the way they do that is they go and get a 501c3 and get incorporated. So if you have a 501c3 and are incorporated, then even unbeknownst, you put yourself under government. Thus, you have to follow the mandates of the government. That's another whole lesson.
Let's go there.
When you're a 501c3, there are court cases out there. And what they're saying is that, you have to, as a church, follow the public policy. And who sets that public policy? The government sets that public policy.
Right.
Thus, there are things that the church is mandated to do
and not do
if they're 501c3. So there are a lot of free churches popping up that don't go and get incorporated. People have to know that although their tithes and offerings are still tax deductible, that church won't be on record with the IRS.
But their donations would still be tax deductible, even if it's a free church?
As long as it's a church, it's still tax deductible. Just because that church isn't in the circular, I believe it's circular 170, just because that name is not in there does not mean that your deduction is not something that's tax deductible. So there's a lot behind it. I deal very, very heavily with that and the taxes because it's an issue. The government cannot audit a church. It would take an act of Congress to audit a church. But what they do is they go in the back door and they audit the pastor. And so that's another one of those areas that needs to be watched. The church's finances are key. And I know that ministry and all that is important, but that underlying volcano down there is the finances. There are so many volatile things that go on with the finances that have to be taken care of and have to be kept up with.
Right. And obviously, you've got conversations. We had Dr. Gina Zerlo on the show talking about Form 990 and how churches are not required to file that. Another interesting angle is looking at the payroll protection program, the PPP. What is your perspective on that as churches have applied for this money from the government to help meet payroll expenses? In your experience, as this has unfolded, has that been overall a win or not a win for churches that you've talked to?
Well, so far it's been a win because it's for payroll, and supposedly as long as you spend 60% on payroll, it's forgiven. And just as I said, if the church has put themselves under the 501c3 and incorporated, then they should be able to also reap benefits from that if they're also going to have to follow mandates from that. So yes, I know of several churches that have gotten that, and I know that they have used it for payroll.
Right. So, following up on what you said earlier about free churches not needing to get their 501c3 exemption and still allowing contributions or donations to be tax deductible, what would be the main reason why churches would get a 501c3 if that makes them subject to government? Is it because of limited liability?
No, it's not. People just didn't know. That was something that was made up a long time ago for churches and to put them under that umbrella. So a lot of churches just did it because that was what their lawyer or their accountant told them to do. And unfortunately, it has consequences for those churches who are actually practicing authentic Christianity and preaching the word. It would stop them from preaching on certain items. So, for example, if a pastor gets up and he wants to say that this whole thing of the Black Lives Matter has morphed, and now it's not just Black Lives Matter. If he wants to get up and say that, then there's somebody in his church that has a problem with it. They go turn him in so that they can, quote unquote, take the 501c3. So those are the issues. If you're granted some kind of privilege by the government, it can be taken away. Otherwise, the free church doesn't have to deal with that on that level.
Yeah, and the free church, that movement is growing very quickly in terms of percentage. So here's another question for you on the topic of taxes. I recently heard that income taxes in the United States are voluntary. Is that true?
Yes and no. Actually, I've done the research and I can't find a law that requires anybody to file an income tax return or pay an income tax. However, they're not going to let you get away with that. I mean, the government has the guns. And no matter what you say, and no matter what law you quote, no matter what you show them, for example, there's no definition of income in the Internal Revenue Code. The definition of income comes from some U.S. Supreme Court cases. So the income is corporate profit. So let's say, Robbie, if I cut your grass, you pay me $100. I used my brain, my arms, and my legs to cut your grass. You gave me $100 bill. That's an even exchange. That should not be taxable because I've used my life force and then you compensated me for it. But Walmart, let's say the smallest Walmart in the country, earned $100,000 yesterday. They have lights to pay, they have salaries to pay, they have rent to pay and all that. And let's say all their expenses came out to be $80,000. They're only taxed on $20,000. You see the difference there? I'm taxed on the whole $100. They're only taxed on the portion that was over and above the expenses. So when I looked at that, and me and others, there's a lot of information out there. There's a movie, a Hollywood producer got fed up with the IRS. His name is Aaron Russo. He's passed on now, but he was the director of Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and The Rose with Bette Midler. He did a documentary called America from Freedom to Fascism, where he featured 3 former IRS agents, a former FBI agent, some constitutional lawyers, and basically saying that the income tax doesn't apply. Most Americans that live and work in the 50 states are not really liable based on what the law says, but they don't care what the law says because if you get wind of it and everybody stops filing, then they don't get the money. None of the money for income taxes goes towards running the country anyway. The gas tax pays for the roads, the ad valorem taxes pay for the teachers and the firemen and all that, and this money goes towards the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, isn't federal. It's a long story. They can go and look at America, Freedom to Fascism. It's online all over the place to see that. And that was a fight that I took on, me being at that time a CPA, me being a former IRS agent. They didn't like that. Joe Bannister, myself, John Turner, and about 2 other former IRS agents started speaking out on it, and they slammed us. And they can look at that story too. But people, if they want to take on that fight, I wouldn't. I took on that fight. I tried to put a sword to the neck of the beast. Now I teach people to starve the beast. Don't risk your family. Don't risk, going to prison like I did. All these other things. Don't risk that. Just learn ways to starve the beast. So I teach people how to keep what they earn, protect what they earn, and grow what they earn. instead of going out and saying, I'm not going to file taxes now.
So you mentioned on social media that working 9 to 5 is not enough to gain wealth. I want to quote some other people on that related topic. It was the Roman statesman Cicero that stated that the very wage that people receive is a pledge of their slavery. And also, Southern slaveholders would actually criticize Northern businesses by saying, hey, yeah, we have people in slavery, but you're essentially giving them wage slavery. And recently, Kanye West, at his first campaign rally in South Carolina, said Harriet Tubman didn't actually free the slaves. She just moved them so they could be accessible towards white business owners. So do you believe that salary is a form of slavery?
The way the system is made up, yes, Robbie, right now, the children are indoctrinated in the government schools. They're not taught to think. They're taught groupthink. They're trained to be obedient employees for the corporatocracy. That's what they're trained to be. So my children never graced the halls of a government school. They know how to be strategic thinkers. They know how to, be creative. A job is just that. It keeps you just over broke. It makes you jump out of bed. And it's okay because a lot of people have to have a job. They've created mortgages. They have car notes and all that. However, if you want to gain wealth, you have to do more than that. You can't come home from your 9 to 5 and turn on the television, which I call the electronic income reducer. You can't do that. You can come home and decompress for a while, eat your dinner, to take some time with your family, and you need to create wealth, which is starting a home-based business. So I'm a strong, strong advocate of starting home-based businesses. That's what I do. My clients are all in the process from the beginning to the ending stages of starting home-based businesses, because that's how you gain wealth. You take the money that you start earning from your home-based business and not go out and buy a new Mercedes or whole bunch of new clothes, but you reinvest that to the point where you start gaining hard assets.
So speaking of that shift that happened in education, a lot of that was coupled with the Industrial Revolution, where parents also became less involved in the raising of their children because they needed to be working. In tandem with that, you also had just that divorce between discipleship in the home and the education system. I think it was John Dewey developed to be able to create more workers, not necessarily more thinkers. So if you look at this year of 2020 and the reversal of some of those systems of corporate life as well as education, what impact do you see this reintegration of agrarian or pre-industrial revolution family life having on our country?
Right now, it's in an uproar, Robbie. The parents don't know what to do. Even if they're young parents, they've been indoctrinated. I got to go to work. I got to make some money. I've got to pay this Mercedes-Benz payment. I can't deal with these children. They don't deal with their own children. So they're realizing, hey, I don't even know my children, let alone know how to teach them. So in that light, as far as Christianity is concerned, it's a good thing. If the foundation crumbled, what can the righteous do? The foundation has crumbled. The silver lining out of this is that we have to get back to family. We have to get back to supporting each other and not depending on government agencies and other agencies. So yes, here in Georgia, I think made national news the day before yesterday about the schools opening and half the kids not having masks and all that. And they're making a big deal out of this. But getting back to the family is mandatory right now because you can't go back into the schools. My granddaughter is in Christian school and they're giving them a chance to come virtual or go into the classroom. But a lot of schools aren't going back into the classroom. The government schools have decided not to go back into the classroom. So the people are saying, well, why am I paying all this tax and I'm not going back into the school? The parents are saying, how can I get back to work? I have to work. Some parents have a job that they have to be there present. So this thing has just turned the country upside down, but we are getting back to family, kicking and screaming for some people, but we are getting back to family.
So looking at the relationship between not just family and government, but also where the church plays in, how does the role of a local church better equip families to really make this country into a better place?
Ministry is the first thing. We got to have people in place to counsel. The older women should be teaching the younger women. So these younger women out here with small kids and not only physically supporting them, but also supporting them with ways of encouragement, how to manage this. How do you manage having children at home and having to work online and these things? We need to have training on that. Zoom training is great. So getting on there with a class and how to manage your children at home, those kinds of things. So that's the church's responsibility. That's not the government's responsibility. We let the government take over a lot of the things that the churches were doing. My grandfather told me that when he was young and married and was out of work sometimes, because we're from Detroit, and when the factories would close down for whatever reason for a while, there would be groceries on the front porch. Now we got the welfare system, and we got to get out of that. So getting government out of the way, I think, is a great thing, Ravi, but we do have to support each other with the people coming together. What are your needs? What do you need? How can I help you? That's who we're supposed to be.
Yeah. So when we have a guest coming up on the podcast, we like to poll our listeners and ask, hey, what questions do you have? And I want to share a couple of these with you. One is practically, how do you balance home and work life? That's one question we got from entrepreneurs. And what's some practical advice for maybe a married couple that is in business together, doing it from their home?
I like both of those. Balance is very important. A lot of times we don't know how to stay in balance. But what I've done with one of my partners that actually came to me with this is turn my life into a wheel, a circle, and it has 10 parts. It's called the 10 life values. And it's like family, health.
Like the wheel of life.
Right, exactly. You put all that together and make sure that you're checking that. You can't just write it down and go somewhere. You have to continue to go back. It's like right now, the health part is out of balance. Or right now, I need to get back in balance because my profession part is out of balance. Keeping in balance and making sure we keep a check on it. I have some couples that are in business together, and it's like tag team. It's almost like tag team wrestling because, one of them has got to take care of the kids right now while the other one's doing it. Sometimes the husband is doing it during the week in the evenings, and the wife is doing it on the weekends, or they just tag team. Especially when they have small children, because our priority is our children. That's our future. And those are our future soldiers in the Christian world. So we've got to make sure that we don't put them aside while we try to climb a ladder. So usually the wife is taking care of the children while the husband is doing the business. Sometimes she can participate. I have one couple that the wife is the one that's on the phone during the day. The children are doing their homeschool stuff. And then when the husband comes home from work, he gets involved in the creativity part of it. So they work it out. And it works out well for a lot of people. I've seen some of these people in business, 10, 20, even 30 years because they work it out that way. The children involved in the business because they're grown.
Yeah, absolutely. And that gets back to kind of the pre-industrial revolution where the kids would work on the farm.
I love it.
With their families and get discipled through that.
Yes.
So another question that one of our listeners had is practically, are there ways that maybe the average person isn't aware of if they do own a business or just in everyday life that they can lower their taxes in an ethical, legal way?
Yes, I think that people don't understand that they can write off just about everything but the kitchen sink. Their Internal Revenue Code section 162 talks about ordinary and necessary business expenses. Ordinary and necessary means common acceptable expenses. So I'm going to give you an example. It's kind of a funny example. Back in 1984, there was a tax court case, and a woman named Cindy Hess, she wrote off a breast enlargement, and the IRS just about laughed themselves under the table and took her deduction away for her breast enlargement. But she decided to go to tax court. And Cindy Hess won her case in tax court. Why did she win? Because Cindy Hess, better known as Chesty Love, was a pole dancer. And she was able to verify that expense for her breast enlargement was ordinary and necessary for her to keep up with the younger girls that are coming in. So if Chesty Love can write off her breast enlargement, and challenge people to look at what they're doing and make sure that their expenses are business expenses. For example, don't just go to the grocery store. That's not a taxable mileage deduction. But if you're going to the grocery store and you incorporate getting some pens and paper or some thank you cards from the grocery store, now it's a business expense. Don't just go to Florida for vacation. Find a conference that's going on, maybe a 1 or 2 day conference, and now it's tax deductible. That's why when Hillary Clinton said, Donald Trump doesn't pay his taxes, everybody said, oh, and they started running to me. And I'm saying, no, he said he was a smart man and he is. There's something called the net operating loss, and he pays people thousands and thousands of dollars to find things in the tax code that will help. But we don't necessarily have to do that because we don't have all of that going on. But we can just look and say, what is ordinary, what is necessary for my business, and write it off. I mean, mileage, every 2 miles you drive is $1. So if you're not keeping up with your mileage and your calendar, then every 2 miles you drive, you're throwing $1 out of the window. There are easy ways to do. That's what I teach my clients. I get them down to the bare minimum where they're not paying much of anything, because I try to make sure that they understand what you do needs to be business related before you do anything else.
No, that's really helpful. I want to circle back on something you said earlier in some of the dialogue that we had about the church's relationship with government and even with families' relationship with government. Some people, especially leaning towards the left, would say, man, that's really extreme. Like, what about the government's role in caring for the poor? What would you say, if you look theologically, what is your basis for what I would describe as maybe a more libertarian approach towards the relationship with government?
The church was doing all that. Let's look back at the early church. That's our model. Look at the Bible. They were taking care of the widows. They were taking care of the orphans. They were taking care of the poor. Now, the government has drawn money away from us via the taxes. And they're not doing that with the money. They're starting wars. They're giving it to the National Endowment for the Arts so somebody can draw a picture of Jesus upside down in a vat of urine. All that other stuff is. So our money has been siphoned off away from what we could be doing as ministries or as individuals to help people. So yes, we need to get back to helping people, just like the early church. And I think that that's a part of what's happening right now with people out of work. They're looking at the fact that, yeah, I'm getting unemployment maybe, but I don't want to sit around here. Let me go and volunteer. Let me go and get on the phones. Let me, go into crisis centers. There are people thinking about committing suicide. We need to get back to the early church, get back to the old landmark.
Yeah. Now, if you look at the, Acts 2 model, it's interesting in that it's voluntary sacrifice is what I see happening in that. And a lot of folks on the left may not like the voluntary part of it. They'd prefer for it to be more involuntary sacrifice, where everybody by default is going to be giving a certain thing towards the government, which can be redistributed. Folks on the right may not like the sacrifice part as much because they may want the rights to do X, Y, and Z. If we look at this model of Acts 2, I do see it as kind of being really the hardest of the options, but really the most fruitful of them, in that people are voluntarily giving of their time, of their efforts, of their money, of their lives for one another, and really seeing the grace of God kind of from the bottom up build their societies together. So I do think there's a huge opportunity for the church. I do think that our voice oftentimes in our communities to talk about potential government overreach is limited when we're not doing those things.
Right.
And so I think it's really a matter of asking, Lord, what can we do in our community? What can we do in our city to serve those that are hurting, those that are needing it? Being more about what we're doing for the community than even being against anything, whether that's the government or whether that's X, Y, and Z. We need to be focused first on solutions, and a lot of the problems will probably take care of themselves if we're doing our job.
I agree. The church has gotten away from what we were supposed to be doing. And as we go through this crisis, I think we're getting more and more back to that, because the question is, what do you want us to do, Lord? We as a church, we've fallen. If my people were called by my name, we haven't been humbling ourselves. We haven't been praying. We haven't been seeking his face. Now we get all the time in the world to do that. We're a captive audience. Let's do this, Lord. Show us what we should do as a whole body and as individual churches. What should we be doing to help the community, to bring people towards Christ?
And the interesting thing is the end of that scripture says he's going to heal our land. And in the Old Testament, the land was the family business. The land was the source of income. It was the economics. A lot of revival meetings that I've been a part of don't really incorporate that, but it's more heal our land as general for, whatever we're talking about. But that's actually a very direct economic implication to that scripture. My hope is that exactly what you shared is, as we, humble ourselves and pray, and God will hear from heaven and will actually heal the economic engines to be a blessing for all of society in our 2020 day.
Yes, definitely.
Well, Sherry, is there anything else you'd like to share? Your wealth of wisdom and knowledge. Any closing thoughts for our listeners?
I want people to just sit down and reflect on what their passion is. What is your passion? Because your passion can be turned into profit. When I sit down with my clients and they want a home-based business and they're thinking about this, that, and the other, and I'll listen to them, but I'll say, what is it that you were doing in your early 20s that you really enjoyed? Or what were you doing in high school, depending on the age of the client, that you really enjoyed? And find a way to turn that into a home-based business. Because right now, with the supply chains being broken as they are, we need to supply each other. So this is the greatest opportunity to start a home-based business, especially for those 52 million people that are unemployed in the United States of America, or more, because a lot of them have dropped off the books. figure out a home-based business. There's so many people out there just sitting there doing nothing. And my heart grieves for the fact that they don't understand that, hey, you can do this. So start a home-based business, figure it out. I've got clients that are making things physically. I've got a lot of clients that are making money online. I've got clients that are writing books, help books, how-to books. I've got one client that was 400 pounds. Now she's down to like a size 4. She's teaching people how to manage their weight and stress. And there are a lot of people gaining weight right now and under stress. So these are things, just figure out what you can do. God gave all of us gifts. He didn't give them to us for nothing. Figure out your gift, use your gift to help people. And at the same time, you can make money to sustain yourself and your family.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Well, Sherry, how can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
Well, I have a couple of websites. I actually cater to churches, and my website is sherrypeeljackson.com. For the general population that aren't churches, it's wakethepeople.com. Wakethepeople.com describes all of the things that I talk about, what I go through, what I do, and how I help people for the general population. And sherrypeeljackson.com for the churches, because I actually go in and do audits on the church. I assess where they are. You know, where are you with your finances? Where are you in your administrative office, your policies and procedures and all that, and go in to make sure that they are in compliance, and even more so than that, operating in integrity.
Absolutely. Well, Sherry, thank you so much for your time. A lot of great stuff to think about. Appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you, Robbie, and you keep up your good work also.
Thank you.
Well, guys, what'd you think? Do you believe that our country is a corporatocracy? If you'd like to join the discussion about this episode, join our private, curated Facebook group at praisehands.com/get-involved. If you believe in what we're doing here on this show, at that same link, you can become a monthly financial supporter of this show, as well as join our growing volunteer team. Again, you can join the Facebook group, donate, or volunteer at praisehands.com/get-involved. Well, thanks for tuning in, friends. We'll see you right back here real soon.